Carlos had always lived in a small village nestled in the mountains, surrounded by lush forests and fields of green. The days were peaceful and slow, and people rarely left the village. Carlos, however, had always dreamed of something more, a life beyond the mountains, one that offered excitement, opportunities, and new experiences. His dream wasn't just about adventure, it was about growth. And to grow, he knew he would need to leave his quiet home. At 25 years old, Carlos felt ready. He had finished his studies, learned all that his village could teach him, and decided it was time to move to the city. He had always been fascinated by the way people spoke in the city, how they communicated so quickly and easily, their words flowing with confidence. Carlos had always struggled with language. Though his native tongue was beautiful and rich, he knew it wasn't enough to succeed in the city. He needed to learn English. Growing up, Carlos had never been exposed to much English. It was taught in school, of course, but the lessons were basic: words, phrases, and a little grammar. He could understand some simple English, but speaking it, especially with native speakers, felt intimidating. He knew that to be truly successful in the city, he had to master it. But the idea of learning an entire new language felt like standing at the foot of a mountain, looking up at the towering peak. The day Carlos packed his bags and said goodbye to his family, the reality of what he was doing hit him hard. His parents were supportive, though worried. They knew the city would be a challenge, but they trusted him to figure things out. As he boarded the bus, Carlos felt a mixture of excitement and fear. His heart raced. What would the city be like? Would he be able to find a job? And most importantly, could he learn English well enough to fit in? When Carlos arrived in the city, the hustle and bustle overwhelmed him. The streets were full of people walking quickly, talking on their phones, and rushing from one place to another. The noise, the cars, the flashing lights, all of it seemed like another world compared to the quiet life he had known. But Carlos was determined. He had no time to waste. He found a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood and started looking for a job. For the first few weeks, Carlos felt lost. He applied to several places, but most of the jobs required a good command of English. He was rejected again and again. Every time he received an email or phone call saying, "Thank you, but we're looking for someone with more experience," his confidence took a hit. He could speak basic English, but he struggled to understand people when they spoke quickly, and he often didn't know how to express himself in conversation. It was as if a wall had been built between him and the opportunities he desperately wanted. One evening, after a particularly discouraging day, Carlos sat in his small apartment, staring out the window. He thought about returning home, back to the village where life was easier, where he was comfortable. But then, he remembered his dream. He remembered the city, the energy, and the possibilities. He couldn't give up now. Carlos decided to take action. He would learn English, not just in the classroom, but in his everyday life. He enrolled in an English course at a local language school. The class was small, and the teacher, Mrs. Johnson, was kind and patient. She started with basic phrases and vocabulary, but the most important lesson she taught was about confidence. She encouraged the students to speak as much as possible, even if they made mistakes. "Mistakes are part of learning," she would say. "You cannot learn if you are afraid to try." At first, Carlos felt awkward. He was afraid to speak in front of others, especially in English. But little by little, the other students, many of whom were from different countries, made him feel comfortable. They all had the same goal: to improve their language skills, and they supported each other. Carlos found himself looking forward to the classes. He would practice every day, repeating phrases and words, listening to English podcasts, and watching movies with subtitles. Slowly, the words started to make more sense. The fear of making mistakes began to fade, replaced by a sense of accomplishment. But Carlos knew that speaking English well in class was one thing. Speaking it in real life was another. He started to push himself out of his comfort zone. He would order food in English at restaurants, ask for directions, and try to have small conversations with people. Most of the time, he was nervous, but he reminded himself that it was okay to make mistakes. The more he practiced, the more confident he became. One day, while walking home from class, Carlos saw a help wanted sign in the window of a cafe. His heart skipped a beat. The job was for a waiter, and while it didn't require advanced English, it would be a good opportunity to practice. Carlos hesitated for a moment. He knew he wasn't fluent, but this could be his chance. He took a deep breath, walked inside, and asked to speak with the manager. The manager, a friendly woman named Sarah, asked Carlos a few basic questions in English. Carlos stumbled a little, but he answered as best as he could. To his surprise, Sarah offered him the job on the spot. "Your English is fine," she said. "We can always improve it as you go. The most important thing is your attitude and willingness to learn." Carlos couldn't believe it. He had his first job in the city. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of new experiences. At the cafe, Carlos learned how to communicate with customers, take orders, and work in a fast-paced environment. He made mistakes, of course. He forgot orders, mispronounced words, and sometimes had trouble understanding customers with thick accents. But with each mistake, he learned. Sarah and his colleagues were understanding and patient, and they helped him improve his English. They corrected him when necessary, but they never made him feel embarrassed. Every day was a lesson, and Carlos was soaking it all in. Outside of work, Carlos continued his English studies. He joined a language exchange group where he met people from all over the world. They would meet at a cafe, chat in English, and help each other practice their languages. Carlos loved these meetings. He learned about different cultures, and he also learned new ways to express himself in English. Slowly, he began to feel more comfortable in conversations. One evening, after several months in the city, Carlos sat in the same cafe where he had first applied for the job. He had just finished a long shift, and he was enjoying a cup of tea. As he looked around, he realized how far he had come. A year ago, he would have never imagined that he would be sitting here, comfortably speaking English with his coworkers, feeling like part of the city. His phone buzzed, and he looked down at a message from Sarah. "Carlos, we have a meeting tomorrow. I want to talk to you about something important. Could you come in earlier?" Carlos felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. What could this be about? Was it about his performance? Was he going to be fired? He couldn't think of anything he had done wrong, but the nerves still crept in. The next morning, Carlos arrived at the cafe early. Sarah greeted him with a smile. "Carlos, I want to offer you a promotion," she said. "We've been impressed with your progress, not just with your English, but with how you've worked with customers. You're doing a great job, and I think you're ready for more responsibility." Carlos couldn't believe it. He had worked hard, learned a new language, and earned a promotion. It felt like a dream come true. As Carlos walked home that evening, he felt a deep sense of pride. He thought about his journey, from the small village in the mountains to the bustling city. It hadn't been easy. There had been moments of doubt, frustration, and fear, but he had never given up. He had learned that language wasn't just about words, it was about connection. It was about bridging gaps between people, understanding each other, and creating opportunities for yourself. Carlos knew that he still had a long way to go. English wasn't perfect, and there would always be new challenges ahead. But now he felt confident. The city was no longer an intimidating place. It was his home, and he had built a bridge to a new life.